Did you know that some SUVs that cost over $80,000 ended up being complete failures? And that one luxury SUV was so poorly designed it became one of the biggest embarrassments in automotive history? Today, we're diving into the most useless SUVs in the world. Vehicles that promised power, luxury, and innovation, but completely missed the mark. Some were too expensive, some were badly designed, and some just made absolutely no sense to exist in the first place. Make sure to stick around because the number one SUV on this list might actually shock you. Let's get into it. Number 7. Cadillac Escalade EXT. Let's start with something that looks cool at first, but quickly starts to feel pointless. The Cadillac Escalade EXT was basically a mix between a luxury SUV and a pickup truck. Sounds interesting, right? Well, not really. Under the hood, it had a 6.2-liter V8 engine pushing around 403 horsepower, which sounds powerful, and it was. It could go from 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds, which is decent for such a big vehicle. But here's the problem. It tried to be two things at once and failed at both. As a truck, it had a very small cargo bed, which made it far less useful than a real pickup. And as an SUV, it sacrificed interior space just to make room for that awkward truck design. So you ended up with something that was not practical as a truck, not comfortable as an SUV, and still incredibly expensive, starting at around $63,000. People didn't really know who it was for. Was it for luxury buyers, truck lovers, families? In reality, it didn't fully satisfy any of them, and that's exactly why it quietly disappeared from the market. But if you think that identity crisis was bad, the next SUV took overpriced and unnecessary to another level. Number 6. BMW X6 first generation. Now this one is controversial. The BMW X6 wasn't a failure in sales, but many people still consider it one of the most confusing SUVs ever made. Why? Because BMW basically asked a weird question. What if we made an SUV that's less practical than an SUV? And somehow, they actually did it. The X6 came with strong engines, including a 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8 producing up to 555 horsepower in the high-performance version. It was fast, too, hitting 0 to 60 in around 4.5 seconds, which is insane for an SUV. But here's where things fall apart. The design. That sloping coupe-style roof looked sporty, but it killed rear headroom and reduced cargo space. So, compared to something like the BMW X5, which was cheaper and more practical, the X6 made less and less sense. You were paying more money, often over $70,000, for less space, less comfort for passengers, and worse practicality. It became what many people called a luxury SUV that forgot the point of being an SUV. Still, it sold, mainly because of its bold design. But when it comes to usefulness, very questionable. And speaking of questionable decisions, the next SUV didn't just confuse buyers, it completely disappointed them. Number 5. Jeep Compass first generation. Now this one had huge expectations and failed hard. The Jeep Compass was supposed to bring Jeep's legendary off-road reputation to a more affordable everyday SUV. Sounds like a perfect idea, but the execution? Terrible. It came with a weak 2.0 to 2.4-liter engine producing around 158 to 172 horsepower, which made it feel slow and underpowered. Acceleration was painful, with 0 to 60 taking over 10 seconds. But that wasn't even the worst part. This is a Jeep, a brand known for off-road capability, and yet the Compass was barely capable off-road. Cheap interior materials, poor build quality, and a driving experience that felt more like a budget car than an SUV made things even worse. Even the price didn't justify it, starting around $20,000, which sounds affordable, but not when you consider how many better options existed. It didn't feel like a real Jeep, it didn't perform like an SUV, and it didn't give buyers any strong reason to choose it. It was simply forgettable. But don't worry, things are about to get even worse, because the next SUVs on this list didn't just disappoint, they made people question why they were ever built in the first place. Alright, now we're getting into the SUVs that didn't just miss the mark, they completely lost the plot. Number 4. Lincoln Blackwood. This SUV, or should I say luxury truck, is one of the clearest examples of a vehicle that nobody asked for. The Lincoln Blackwood was introduced as a high-end pickup, trying to combine luxury and utility, but it failed almost instantly. Under the hood, it had a 5.4-liter V8 engine producing around 300 horsepower, which was decent at the time. It could go from 0 to 60 in about 8 seconds. But performance wasn't the issue here. The real problem, it completely ignored what truck buyers actually wanted. First of all, it was rear-wheel drive only. No all-wheel drive, no four-wheel drive. So right away, it couldn't handle rough terrain, which is kind of the whole point of owning a truck. Then there's the cargo bed. Instead of a normal, useful truck bed, Lincoln gave it a carpet-lined, sealed bed with a fancy cover. It looked premium, but you couldn't actually use it for real work. So you couldn't haul properly, you couldn't go off-road, and you still had to pay around $52,000, which was a lot at the time. It was trying to be a luxury statement, but ended up being completely impractical. In fact, it was such a failure that it lasted only 1 year before being discontinued. And if you think that's bad, the next SUV didn't just fail in function, it failed in reputation. Number 3. Range Rover Evoque Convertible. Yes, this is real, a convertible SUV. At first glance, it sounds bold and innovative, but in reality, it's one of the most confusing vehicles ever created. The Range Rover Evoque Convertible came with a 2.0-liter turbocharged engine, producing about 240 horsepower. It could go from 0 to 60 in around 7.8 seconds, which is okay. But nobody was buying this SUV for speed. They were buying it for the experience. And that's exactly where things fall apart. By removing the roof, Land Rover sacrificed structural strength, cargo space, rear seat comfort, and turned an already compact SUV into something even less practical. The trunk space? Almost unusable. The weight? Heavier than the normal Evoque because of extra reinforcements. And the price? Around $55,000. So let's break this down. You're paying luxury money for less space, less practicality, and a design that most people didn't even take seriously. It tried to combine the fun of a convertible with the utility of an SUV, but ended up doing neither properly. Sales were extremely low, and it quickly became more of a novelty than a real option. Still, believe it or not, we haven't reached the worst of the worst yet, because the next SUV on this list didn't just over-engineer, it failed in a way that shocked the entire car industry. Now we've reached the point where things stop being just disappointing and start becoming truly unbelievable. Number 2. Tesla Model X. Now this one might surprise you, because on paper, the Tesla Model X sounds like the future of SUVs. It's fully electric, incredibly fast, and packed with advanced technology. It comes with dual motors producing up to 670 horsepower in the long-range version, and even more in the Plaid version. 0 to 60? As fast as 2.5 seconds. That's supercar-level speed in a family SUV. So why is it on this list? Because sometimes being too futuristic creates more problems than solutions. Let's start with the most obvious feature, the Falcon Wing doors. They look amazing, they open upwards, they turn heads everywhere, but in real life, they're complicated, slow, and often unreliable. In tight parking spaces, they're struggle. In bad weather, they can be frustrating. And repairs? Very expensive. Then there's the interior, minimalistic to the point where it almost feels empty. Everything is controlled through a screen, which might look clean, but can be distracting and inconvenient while driving. And despite being a large SUV, practicality isn't perfect either. The third row is tight, build quality has been criticized, and early models had multiple reliability concerns. With a price starting around $80,000 plus, many buyers expected perfection, but got something that felt unfinished. The XT isn't completely useless, far from it, but it's a perfect example of how innovation without balance can create a product that looks incredible but doesn't fully deliver in everyday use. And now, we've reached the number 1 SUV on this list. And trust me, this one isn't just questionable, it's one of the biggest automotive failures of all time. Number 1. Suzuki X90. Take a second and imagine this. A tiny SUV with only 2 seats and a removable roof. Sounds strange already, right? That's exactly what the Suzuki X90 was. It came with a small 1.6-liter engine producing just 95 horsepower, 0 to 60 over 11 seconds, so it was slow, but that's not even the main issue. The real problem is that it completely failed to understand its purpose. It wasn't practical enough to be an SUV, it wasn't fun enough to be a sports car, and it wasn't useful enough to justify buying it. The rear, there were no real seats, just a tiny storage space. The design? Odd, awkward, and confusing. Even though it had 4-wheel drive, it wasn't particularly good off-road, and inside it felt cheap and outdated even for its time. People didn't know what it was supposed to be, and because of that, almost nobody bought it.